Tonight, my son, who I call Joey, but normal people call Toast now for a really adorable reason when he was back in junior high. And here he is with his pigeon Bernice, but that was taken a long, long time ago. But that's my son. And I don't know how. It, I hope you're not getting a line. I showed this picture last month, but I have to show it again because he's so adorable. And he has the exact same first bird book that I did when I was 5 years old. So he's ahead of me. Uh, that's the little golden stamp book, and I got it on eBay for him. I'm dedicating this program to my beloved screech owl, Archimedes. I got him in the year 2000 and had him for 17 years. He was actually hatched the year before that in Ohio and spent his formative year at the Back to the Wild rehab center in Castalia. And I'm still missing him. And I'm also dedicating it to a dear friend of mine who passed away just a week and a half ago, Bob Finkelstein. He and my dear, dear, dear friend Paula have been big parts of my life since I first met Bob in 1994. And he will be badly missed especially when I go to Ohio, where I usually get to see him. So tonight we're talking about owls, and they are one of my favorite groups of birds, which is really counterintuitive because I tend to be the kind of person who likes the chickadees and the mice, not the chickadee and mouse eaters. But I ended up, I used to teach junior high school and challenged my students to a lot of bird calling. And that made me have to do it first. And I got really good at owl calls, good enough that I am one of the winners of the American Ornithologists Union's bird calling contest in the repertoire category for my owl calls. So, and when I was a rehabber, I ended up with quite a few of them. So I became very enamored of them. Uh, and that's why we're talking about them tonight. Most people have never seen a wild owl, but everybody knows what they are. When Duluth, one of our businesses used to host an owl calling contest, and there would be toddlers in there whose parents held them up to the microphone so the toddler could go who, um, because they all know owls. That's a bird that is not called a bird, it's called an owl when you see a picture. They're famous for their hooting, but they're also kind of famous for looking kind of bored and sound asleep in the daytime. Though this owl is looking right at me, its eye is open a slit and it is watching me take its picture. Owls are extremely popular. I've written one book about owls, but I've of the 12 books I've written, publishers have decided to put owls on the covers of 5 of them because everybody loves owls. And that's why every time there was a new Harry Potter book released, one of our independent bookstores would have the big midnight party at our train depot, and kids would climb onto this very old locomotive to pick up their book. That was called the Hogwarts Express. And to kill time, they always started at around 8 p.m., and everybody had to kind of mill around for 4 hours until they were allowed to get their books. So I would walk around with Archimedes and I would be Professor McGonagall explaining how real owls compare to Harry Potter owls. Owls are very much like cats in the kinds of folklore that every culture in the world has about them. They can be very wise and magnificent creatures, or they can be very spooky and give people intimations of death. Part of it is that they have these cat like eyes. Part of it is that some owls have cat like ears that make their shape very, very cat like. And part of it, well, people don't really notice this, but it is intriguing that their bristly facial feathers work very much like cat whiskers. And they look kind of spooky. This is a nest full of long-eared owls. I did not take this picture. One of my friends did. But don't they look like they're just kind of melted into that, like the Wicked Witch of the West melting? Somebody must have thrown water on them or something, but it was being banded is why someone was in the nest. I like what W.J. Broderick wrote about them in 1894. There are few animals that have been more suspiciously regarded than owls. Their retired habits, the desolate places that are their favorite haunts, their hollow hootings, fearful shriekings, serpent like hissings, and coffin maker snappings have helped to give them a bad eminence more than overbalancing all the glory that Minerva and her own Athens could shed around them. Uh, Minerva was the goddess in Rome comparable to Athena in Greece. And Athena was always depicted, or almost always, holding an owl, while Minerva hardly ever was, because the Romans were far more superstitious about owls than the Greeks were. And I find that pretty intriguing. Owls glide and flap slowly, but they cannot soar. And part of the reason is there's no thermal air currents at night, but you need different kinds of feathers to ride a thermal than you do to just flap slowly and silently. Owls have to fly silently. We intuitively know it's to sneak up on their prey, but that's only half the reason. The other half of the reason that they must be silent is that their wings are right next to their ears. And when they're sneaking up on prey, they are trying to hear that prey as they fly in. And if their wings were noisy, they couldn't accomplish that. This this is a northern hawk owl, and it is listening as well as looking for prey as it's hovering. Let's compare a great horned owl to a red-tailed hawk. They're both high-end predators. Great horned owls very often use red-tailed hawk nests. They are in the same territory, but they're hunting at different times of day, and they're comparable in their size. The great horned owl is 22 inches, where the red-tailed hawk is 19. So the great horned owl is a little longer, and it's significantly heavier. It weighs 3 pounds to the red-tailed hawk's 2 or 2.5. But the red-tailed hawk is the one with the much bigger wingspan, 49 inches to 44. And that's so it has a big wings to ride on rising air currents so it can fly without flapping at all, where the great horned owl has to flap. How do they get that silent flight? Part of it is that their flight feathers, the primary wing feathers, each the leading edge of it has this comb of stiffened feathers that break one feather whoosh into 50 or 100 tiny, tiny, tiny wishes. Here's a wing from a great gray owl, and you can see how the first couple feathers have these really noticeable combs, and those are stiff. And that's just the way the feather looks. And that's on the front edges of those wings. So if you find an owl flight feather, you know not just that it's a wing feather because one side is that here's the vein on this feather and this side is much narrower than this side, but also the narrow end is the front end, and the first few feathers have that comb on them. Owls have extremely forward facing eyes that cannot turn from side to side. So their eyes are forward facing like our human eyes, but we can turn our eyes while they can't. And so I have some close ups. The reason they can't turn them is their eye is sort of shaped like a bell. Here's where the retina is inside the head, and it's huge. And here's the front, and it can't turn because it's stuck in there. Because their eyes are so forward facing, they have binocular vision in a pretty wide area, and they have some peripheral vision, but they obviously cannot see in the back of their head. While an American woodcock can see in have binocular vision both forward and even more behind them, because they have to look out for owls and other predators when their beak is down in the mud and muck and the predator's coming from above. And so while they're facing down, they're seeing above in binocular vision. It's kind of magical. Why would an owl turn its head upside down just because a photographer was taking its picture? In the back of their eye, they have a retina just like us. And birds and primates, of all the mammals, it's mainly the primates who have an area in the retina called the fovea. The fovea is where the rods and cones are extremely dense. That is where the sharpest vision is. For us, the fovea is pretty much straight back, so we see clearest when we're looking straight ahead. For an owl, the fovea, they actually have more than one too, but they're above the midline. So their most acute vision is down below. So when they're perched, they can see their prey on the ground. That's where they need to be the most focused. Well, when a photographer comes who's standing higher than this owl is, and the owl wants to see that photographer clearly, it has to turn its head upside down so that the face of the photographer is going into the fovea. So it can be seeing very clearly that way. They have two sets of eyelids. All birds have two sets of eyelids. In most birds, the upper eyelid is smaller than the lower, but with owls, the larger eyelid is the upper one. That's so they can shade out light during the daytime. So here's the eyelid on this great horned owl, and here is the inner eyelid or the nictitating membrane. And on the snowy owl, this eye is wide open, and this eye, I caught it in the middle of a one-eye wink or a wink, and you could see both the nictitating membrane, which is very, very translucent. So while they're flying, if they blink their nictitating membrane, they're not losing much vision, and you can see the upper eyelid. With many owls, that upper eyelid is extremely feathered. That's because their eyes are so humongous and they want to hold their body heat in while they're sleeping. So they're insulated when their eyes are closed. But yeah, there's that nictitating membrane. Owl pupils do not get very small and bright light because they have to get humongous when it's dark. And so, to compensate for that, they can kind of shade their own eyes with this ridge of their skull. And so you could see that even in the sun, direct sun, this owl's eye is shaded by the owl's uh, skull and by part of the eyelid. That's what gives them that angry look, though, is that their skull forms that shading over the eye. And if the owl is being held, as Frank Nicoletti is, he caught this owl banded and brought it home to my house when he was living with us one year to show my kids and then released it. But that owl looks very angry. It probably is very angry, but its expression is not showing that. That's just the way they're. When we want to draw an angry person, we make their eyebrows get knit together and it forms a shape like that owl's skull. And here's a boreal owl on a sunlit day, and see how it's keeping its eyes in shadow. Owls can almost certainly see light in the ultraviolet wavelengths, and we know that because their feathers reflect. They fluoresce under ultraviolet light, and we can only see it when we use a black light, but owls can see it without a black light. Why is that useful? It fades over time, especially as it's exposed to sunlight. So, a male or female owl evaluating a potential mate can exclude one or another because it's so faded that they don't look like they could find that they're very good at finding or defending cavities. It's very helpful for bird banders because they can look at these feathers and see which are brand new feathers, which are pink, and which are the older feathers, which are duller. And it makes it easier than really closely examining the feathers to see subtle shading between gray and brown. Owls look like they have short, thick necks, but under those feathers, they do not. They have extremely skinny necks, and they're also extremely scrawny under their feathers. Here is a pic. Eric Brunke, who's an amazing bird guide, was living with us one winter while he was doing guiding up here. And he went out with his group and they found this gorgeous great gray owl. And then when they were coming home and retracing their steps, that poor bird had been killed by a car. I think Eric said it was still warm when he picked it up, which made it somehow even more tragic. But my dog is way littler, or about the same size as a poor dead great gray owl. And I had a scale and weighed them both within 2 minutes of taking this picture. Pip weighed 9 pounds exactly. The owl weighed 3 pounds exactly. So all that bulk is not solid body. Most of that bulk is just feathers. Owls have crooked ears. It's to gauge their exact distance from prey, whether it's in the dark or when the prey is buried under a tunnel, like voles create these tunnels. Once in a while, a vole comes out in the open, but they usually like to be under a tunnel. So when owls are hunting for voles, they hardly ever get to see the vole before they've got it in their talons. So the crooked ears, one of them, the left ear, is lower and forward. The right one is higher and further back. So when the owl is looking down and listening hard, when it gets the sound at the maximum volume in both ears, it reaches the left ear a split second before it reaches the right ear. And as the owl flies in, it keeps hearing that. That's why they need that silent flight so they can hear it so well. And if they grab in the pitch black, because they have done barn owls, they've tested their ability to hunt in absolute darkness indoors. And the barn owl, if it grabbed a millimeter too soon, it wouldn't have anything. And if it grabbed it a millimeter too late, it would have crashed into the floor. So having the different positions and gauging the rate that the sound is reaching the closer ear to the further ear is what tells the owl when to grab. The ears are hidden behind their facial discs, behind those cheek feathers. And those feathers along this break, the owls can actually move their facial disc slightly up and slightly down. That helps them working like satellite dishes to focus the sound the best. But and if you lift those feathers forward, it's not ripping or anything. You can just use your finger or a pencil to move the feathers forward and actually see the ginormous ear behind it. But owls disapprove of that when you do it when they're alive. This is a live long-eared owl. It was a captive bird used for education. But here's a poor dead long-eared owl. This one was brought to me after our Halloween snowstorm in, I think it was 1991, when we had 39 inches of snow on Halloween during the peak of long-eared owl migration. And it is impossible for an owl that doesn't even weigh a pound to hunt animals that are hidden under 39 inches of snow. So people were picking them up dead in their yards, and it was tragic. I took this picture with an old camera a long time ago. This is a scan of a slide, and you cannot see that it's embedded with snow crystals, but I waited till it was thawed enough. I laid it on my dining room table. Here's the beak. The eyes are hidden, and here's the long ears. It's facing up, and I've lifted the cheek, and it was frozen enough that it didn't bounce back. If this had been a live bird, you would have to hold your finger or the pencil to hold it in place because the split second you let go, it would have closed up again. This is not torn. This is what the ear looks like. And banders sometimes show people that every time I've seen a bander or anybody show people a living owl's ear, the owl is kind of cringed. And I think that wish of air must feel yucky. So I only feel comfortable showing it on a poor dead bird who's not feeling any pain. But when I lifted it further, you could see how ginormous the ear is. And what this is the back of the eye. Their skull is filled with ginormous eyes and ears with very little room in the middle left for brain. So people used to think they must be kind of stupid, but they're actually quite intelligent birds. Talons are carrying feet. The claw does not make it a talon. All birds have claws. And I used to, when I would talk to children, would talk about my cat and Archimedes. My cat's claws were sharper than Archimedes, but my cat did not have talons. If Archimedes caught a mouse and wanted to bring it somewhere, he would carry it in his feet. If my cat caught a mouse, it couldn't carry it in its feet. It might use its feet and its mouth just the way Archimedes would to kill it, but to carry it, the cat had to use his teeth, where owls can carry things in their feet. The claws are pretty big and sharp, but the muscularity of the toes is what makes them talons. Owls produce pellets. They swallow large chunks of prey. They often swallow the entire prey whole. And then the prey goes into their stomach, into the first chamber of their stomach, which is the glandular stomach, secreting acids that change a mouse into mouse soup. And you have the liquid part, all the soft parts of the mouse that have liquefied, but you also have the noodles. The teeth and fur and bones are just floating in the soup like noodles. Then after it's all been soupified, the food goes into the second chamber of the stomach called the gizzard or the muscular stomach. The job of the gizzard is to squeeze out all the liquid soup into the intestines where the owl can get all the nutrition. But the fur, the bones, and the teeth or feathers if it ate a bird do not have nourishment. So that gets compacted into the exact size that the owl is squeezing it into in the gizzard. And then all of a sudden, when it's squeezed out, all the nourishment, all of a sudden the owl will look a little bit uncomfortable, open its mouth, and go, "Eh," and out will come a pellet. Deer pellets come out the other end. So do fox pellets. Fox pellets often look like owl pellets, but they did not come, they came through the intestines, so are filled with bacteria. So make sure if you're ever trying to pick up wild owl pellets that they really did come out of an owl and not a fox. And this owl is not producing a pellet either. Their droppings are like other bird droppings. The white part, the whitish part, is the urates, all the nitrogenous wastes from filtering out their blood. And the brown parts are the fecal matter, the poop. But it all comes out in one little plop. A few North American owls migrate every year. The short-eared owl not only migrates, but it also wanders every island group in the world, including Hawaii and the Falkland Islands. Every island group has native short-eared owls that just turned up there. I associate them with wetlands here, but in this photo, this bird is sitting on a lava field in Hawaii. They're the only native owl in Hawaii. Barn owls also live in Hawaii, but they were brought there by people. The short-eared owl found its own way over all the thousands of miles of ocean. Non-migratory owls memorize their territory and they associate with a mate and they stay with that mate for life. They often, screech owls actually are very close to their mates, but even sleeping with them at nighttime. But most owls, even though they're hooting back and forth to keep track of their mate, need enough territory that they can be quite separated, but they always stay in vocal contact with their mates. Owls hardly ever build nests. They use an abandoned one from another species or a cavity. It's the female who incubates the eggs. But rehabbers can use males or females when they have baby owls to take care of. It's much better for an owl to raise that baby than a human. And even male owls will very tenderly feed baby owls of their species. So here's one great horned owl on her nest. Here's a great horned owl in her nest. This is in a park in Ithaca, New York. She's sitting there. You can kind of see her eyes hiding in there. She's sitting on her nest. Both owl parents feed the babies. They're on the Atkins diet. And I don't like snuff films, but I'm going to show you how two different styles of eating young. Archimedes always, I only bought frozen dead mice, kept them in the freezer, and then before I fed them, I left them out on the counter for an hour to get them room temperature. And Archimedes hardly ever swallowed them whole. What he did was lop off the head half first and swallowed that. And then he swallowed the other half. And it looked like spaghetti. And then he would get a drink, which would help to wash the blood off. Here's a barn owl. I took this series of pictures at I think it was at the Owl Festival in Houston, Minnesota, one year, and they had this barn owl who would eat dead mice on command, but he always bit them before he swallowed them. This rat was dead before he got him, but he bit him hard right in the back of the neck to make sure he was dead. It is very dangerous to swallow something that is still alive and might scratch you on the way down. So he made sure he was not just merely dead, but really most sincerely dead. And then he started swallowing them. And their mouth is soft enough on the two sides that they could ratchet it down, moving the upper bill first, pulling it up, then moving the lower and pulling it up and going back and forth to work it into the mouth. Spaghetti. Some people use owl decoys to scare off crows, and I don't think it works very well. Some people associate owls with drinking. This cafe is in New Mexico, and my daughter started me collecting bird beer bottles from all over the world. And of those, a whole bunch of them are of owls. There's the Boreal Owl on I forget what brewery this is, and I should remember because they're a sponsor of the Chicago Cubs. Um, and here's an owl. And of my beer bottles now, I have a whole lot of owl ones. There's over 200 species of owls in the world, but only 20 of them breed in the United States and Canada. And these pictures are not United States or Canadian owls. The spectacled owl picture I took in Panama. I took the bare legged owl in Cuba. I took the Stygian owl in Peru and the black and white owl in Costa Rica. But we're going to go over the ones that you see in the United States. The barn owl is found, it's not a northern species, and we did have one turn up in the bog last winter, but it died very quickly after it was first seen. It was tragic. It's just too cold up here. And the very first one I ever saw in my life, my lifer, was in Chicago at the on the grounds of the Lincoln Park Zoo down here at the northern part of their range, and that one also died before it could be rehabbed. It was too cold for it. They're of an owl that isn't just found in the United States and Canada, though. They're found in a lot of the world, native, and they're just strikingly beautiful birds. But my pictures are all captive birds. This is a wild one that I was with Kim Eckert on a field trip to Madeira Canyon with a group of birders from Minnesota, and it was hanging on a fence. It had apparently it had a pocket rat pocket gopher because it had eaten the head, and we found the headless corpse under the fence. But it was dangling its legs, carrying it, and collided with one of the barbs and got entangled. It ripped its leg. It was just tragic. And if we hadn't stopped for it, it would have been dead in a few hours. It was already 100 degrees when we found it, or not in the 90s, and that was early in the morning. We brought it to a rehab center, and they stitched it up. It needed antibiotics and some steroids and stitching, and they used dissolving stitches, and it was fine. It was released like 4 or 5 days afterward. So that was a barn owl that we saved. I was birding during my big year. I think I was in Arkansas at a national wildlife refuge, and this poor bird had collided with somebody, got tangled in somebody's barbed wire fence, and they didn't know what to do, so they cut the fence off and brought it for rehab. And I'm hoping against hope that it got better, but I never did hear about that, what happened with that one. But they're such gorgeous birds, but they're in a different family than all the other owls. All owls belong to the order Strigiformes, but the barn owl, that family is called Titanidae. And all the rest of the owls I'm going to show you, starting with the flammulated owl that you can't even see his face, but that's the best picture I ever took of one, the only picture I ever took. All these, the rest of the owls I'm showing you now, belong to the family Strigidae. So this is my best picture of a flammulated owl. It was spending the winter um, on in this little green space around a parking lot to a big convention center in Texas. Go figure. But here's a good picture, but I got that off Wikipedia from the US Forest Service. And flammulated owls go down in Central America and Mexico. And uh, up here is they only breed up here and then migrate down there. And when I was doing my big year, I spent a night camping in a national forest in New Mexico outside Bosque del Apache, and one called all night long. I never saw it, but I slept to flammulated owl music. So that was pretty cool. But they're a little tiny brown eyed owl. Most of our little owls have yellow eyes, but flammulated owls have brown eyes. I do not, I've never taken a picture of a whiskered screech owl. But Alan Schmierer did. This I got from Wikipedia. Again, it was a Creative Commons license, so I'm very grateful because I don't have a picture. But ferruginous pygmy owls are found here, are whiskered screech owls. And so you only find them in Arizona, if in the United States. So birders flock there specifically to get whiskered screech owls. And I have seen them and heard them there, but I've never gotten a picture. Western screech owl, I've been luckier. I got this picture during my big year with Ali Sheehy. She took me to a park on a Christmas bird count day in California, and I got this picture. And I got this picture at the Southeast Arizona Birding Festival on a wonderful field trip with Lawrence Halsey in 2019. And he shone one flashlight on it, not a bright one. And we were not supposed to use flash. I just used that illumination and got pictures. So that was pretty thrilling. But the western screech owl is found in the west. The eastern screech owl, this is Archimedes. And here's a wild one. I think I got this picture at the biggest week birding festival in Ohio. Eastern screech owls are restricted to the eastern US, a little bit of Canada, and a little bit of Mexico. And they're adorable. They come in two colors. They can be gray or rusty red. And all owls have to molt every year. When Archimedes did, it seemed rude to take pictures because he never felt good while he was molting. And when he did die when he was 17, he it was at the end of a molt. It just seemed to take a lot out of him. But so he looks pretty amusing here. And after these feathers grew in, he molted his eyelids, and you could see the little pin feathers. I didn't like taking pictures, so I only did a few times because he was such a sweet bird. Great horned owls are the hoot owl. We hear hooting the most. They're the soft, mellow hoo, 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 hoo. With almost all owls, the females are larger than the males, including in great horned owls. But the female great horned owl has a higher pitched sound, even though she's larger. And that's because his skull and his syrinx, the area where he's producing the sounds, are larger than the females. His brain is no bigger, but his skull is. And great horned owls are a New World species that is also found way down in South America. When they're hot and panting, people show pictures of laughing owls, but they are not laughing, they are panting because they're overheated. This is an education bird who I thought the guy should keep him in the shade, but oh well. And this one was I think it had been shot, and I calmed it down right away, um, when it came to my house. I didn't keep it except overnight, and then it went down to the Raptor Center. But Robert Nero, an amazing guy, and for much of his life, he was the world authority on great gray owls in North America. And he told me that when you need to calm an owl down for handling, you touch the feathers on its forehead between its eyes, and you bow your head and let it preen you. Well, that's kind of a dangerous bird, but I just preened it a little, and it was starving when I got it. A farmer up here found it, and it had been in his field for several days. I guess he'd let some people go hunting there, and they shot the owl, and he didn't find it right away. And so it had been several days since those hunters were there. But I was feeding it. After I gave it fluids, the first thing I feed them before they go to the Raptor Center is Gerber strain chicken. First, I give them Pedialyte or a lactated ringer solution to get their fluids up. And then Gerber strain chicken has already been, uh, the enzymes have been added so that it's easy to digest. And I teased that in his mouth. And after a couple bites, he would take it off my finger. And my fingers are almost exactly the color of Gerber strained chicken. But he was so tender in taking it off my finger. It was actually pretty astonishing because they do not have fingers. So, how this owl knew to take it off gently, I do not know, but it was pretty amazing. And it did get better at the Raptor Center. But here it is in a box too. And this is the one Frank brought home after banding to show my kids. And this one landed on my feeder last summer when I had my my cam on the feeder. Look how huge the pupils are in the darkness. They're all the way. That whole eye is pupil. That is how he's going to look. Or is he done looking? I guess he's done looking at the camera. But the pupil is huge. When they're calling, those white feathers on their bib expand. Their throat expands and shows off that white, and it helps you to find them in the dark if you're knowing what you're looking for and lucky. And here's a pair. They get very, very romantic during their breeding season, which will be starting. They're already hooting in pairs up here in northern Minnesota, and they'll be nesting starting right around Valentine's Day. Isn't that romantic? And they make lay round eggs. These photos are from my book Into the Nest. Mari Reed was the photo editor, and she got all these cool photos from different photographers. If you see the book in the corner, you know that's where that picture came from. They're very devoted and gentle with their babies. A lot of times people find an owl that fell out of its nest at this point, and that happens because they start exploring like toddlers. And when they can't hang on to the branch, if they fall, they often get caught by another branch, but sometimes they make it to the ground. And their parents do keep track of them. They do not need help, except possibly if you're in a park where there's dogs running or rude people, you might put it on a nearby branch in a shrub. But the parents are hearing it and taking care of it. The only time you would ever really need to intervene, except to protect it from other people by just moving it a little bit, is if it actually got a broken leg or wing in the fall. But these guys are out of the nest and they're just fine, and their parents are taking good care of them. The snowy owl is famous for Harry Potter. They all the actors who played Hedwig in the movie were males, and they used quite a few owls to play Hedwig. But they were all males for two different reasons. One, the females are bigger and heavier. And when the only movie that they really showed Hedwig very much in was the first one, and that's when Daniel Radcliffe was a little boy. And it looks like he just has a mitten on, but under his wizard cloak, he's wearing a heavy leather arm piece to protect his skin. But because even though the owl is tame and trained, it's hanging on. And so that would be dangerous for a little boy. So partly they used a male because they're lighter, and partly they used them because they're pure white as when they get older, which looks cooler against a wizard's robes. Snowy owls are found in the north. They come down to Duluth every winter, and this is where they usually turn up in the winter in this blue range, but they can turn up and even further south than this dotted line shows during eruptive years, or just one individual may just keep going. But snowy owls are not just American, they're found throughout Europe and Asia as well. And they're pretty magnificent birds. And this one is not laughing, it's overheated. This one I took, you can see Coney Island there. This is a national wildlife refuge in New York City. And here he is right there. And it's a beautiful adult male. This one, there were actually, I took pictures of three different ones. Some people got way closer to take pictures, and that is the height of rudeness where there are signs saying to stay off the dunes. This picture I got in May in Manitowish Waters, Wisconsin, when it should have already returned north. It was in mid-May during the Discovery Center had a birding festival every year. And I took this in May. The next day it had disappeared finally. So had hopefully headed back. Most of them do survive and make their way back. It's totally a myth that they come down here to die. And I took this, I think, in Rhode Island a couple of years ago. And I took this in Two Harbors, Minnesota. And this one was taken in Duluth. When they ban them, they mark them so they'll not put them through the trauma of being trapped again. Their feathers cover their legs so that you can't see the bands easily. And so they would be trapping them over and over if they didn't put some sort of mark on. This mark will go away when it molts its feathers and will fade over the winter anyway. But they're quite beautiful birds. The northern hawk owl is our most diurnal owl, and that's found. We get them every year in the Saxon bog. They breed, so this doesn't show them where they're always found. But they're another one that's also found in Europe and Asia. And they're our tamest owl. I think they're a lot like Canada jays in capitalizing on people or large mammals to steal food from them. And here it is pooping. I used to teach junior high school, so I have to have my junior high school humor. And they perch on little tiny delicate perches um, when they're hunting in the daytime, and it's pretty cool. And they approach people. You don't need to be feeding them to get them curious. Just standing around, they very often will approach. And it's the height of rudeness to throw them something that could have salmonella, like most white mice pets do. Here's a raven harassing one. You can compare the difference in size, but the little owl stood its ground and the raven finally left. I do not have any pictures of northern pygmy owls, though I've seen and heard them many times, but except thanks to the wonder of Wikipedia. They're a western owl. Here's the ferruginous pygmy owl, and I don't have many pictures of them, but the ferruginous one you only find in a tiny area of Texas and a tiny area of southeast Arizona. And so, unless you're going to travel, I got my picture, I think, in Central America. The Cuban pygmy owl I threw in because it's my best pygmy owl picture, even though it's not an American, United States one. The elf owl is our tiniest owl. This picture was from a zoo. I have seen them in the wild, but I had to steal my picture from a Creative Commons copyright free one from Wikipedia. And this one is found in desert areas. In Arizona, they nest often in saguaro cactuses. The burrowing owl is the one that makes burrows underground in Florida, or it nests in prairie dog tunnels in the West. And you can see this bizarre range. It has this little population that is endangered because Florida is so heavily developed, that is totally disjunct from the whole rest of its population, and no one knows why. But it's pretty cool. I got this picture in Texas on one of Kim Eckert's trips, and all the rest of my pictures are from California on another one of Kim Eckert's trips. They're incredibly cool birds. I do not I've never taken a picture of a spotted owl, but I got a picture thanks to the U.S. Forest Service and Wikipedia. They're a bird found in very old growth forest. Um, this is the historic range of the northern spotted owl, of the barred owl. It used to only go to here. And then sometime between 1910 and 1940, it expanded to here. And then it expanded from 1940 to 1960 and 1960 to 1980 and in the 80s. And now look at the range of the barred owl. It is spread. And here's the poor spotted owl, and the barred owl outcompetes it. The trick is they both eat a lot of the same foods, but the spotted owl, the red one, a lot of its diet comes from arboreal mice. And when it catches flying squirrels, it gets them up in the trees. The barred owl, most of its food is on the ground. And as we've wiped out our really mature forests, the ancient forests, that was where the trees really had a lot of bracket fungi, which is what a lot of the arboreal mice eat. And so they have really cut back. Here's an arboreal mouse in California. The barred owl, I love them, but I wish they would have stayed east. Whoever said go west, young bird, uh, did a terrible disservice to the spotted owls. The barred owl is supposed to be here. And because it's spread out with forestry practices, it's doing great at the expense out there of the spotted owl. Here's one I took in my backyard a few weeks ago, which I only knew about because of the swearing crows. Listen for swearing crows if you want to see owls. And here's one hooting at me in Florida. And here's one hooting in Florida. The great gray owl is related to them. They're amazingly gorgeous birds. They're far northern birds, but they nest up in the Saxon bog and they nest in the mountains in the west. So I've seen them in California too, but they're another one that is found in Asia and Northern Europe. And they leave this beautiful snow angel when they drop in to try and catch a mouse. And here's one that was being observed by a very interesting birder that I hadn't even known about. It's funny how that just popped in there recently when I took the picture decades ago. But great gray owls do not weigh much, so they can perch on these tiny, tiny twigs. There is no way a great horned or a snowy owl could sit on that little twig, but they're just stunning birds. And they get hit by cars a lot. And then this one was quite a while ago. It went down to the Raptor Center, but I had it briefly. They're 80% of their diet is tiny mice, and so their feet are not powerful. So I'm holding it on my bare hand and it's not hurting. Its claws are very sharp, but its talons are not powerful. The long-eared owl, those aren't ears, they're just feathers sticking up, and it's found throughout North America and into Mexico and a little bit of Central America, but it's also found in Europe and Asia. They're really cool birds. This is a captive bird. This is a wild bird that I took this picture in Austria, so it's not sitting in the kind of coniferous trees that I took this picture in the US before I had a good camera. They're the ones, this one, if you see a long-eared owl doing this, you've already scared it out of its gourd. It's the height of rudeness. They will first look like this when you startle them, and that's a signal to move back. They know you're there. If they know you're approaching them, that's when they start doing the funky Egyptian head back and forth thing and snapping their beaks. And the photographer who took this was going to be banding the bird, but normally you would not want the owl to do that. And he's the one who took these babies too. And this is my lifer. We weren't allowed to count it as a lifer while it was in the bander's hand, but after he released it, he said if you saw it go to two separate perches, you could count it at the second perch. And here I am holding one that I adopted at Hawk Ridge several years ago, and I was thrilled to have a long-eared owl in my hands. Short-eared owl does have little feathers sticking up on its head, but they're very little compared to the long-eared owl. They can hold them back so you can't see them, but they're found throughout North America and in Mexico, but they're also found at the bottom of South America. They're found here, and they're the ones that have made their way to Hawaii and other island groups. And this is my only wild flying short-eared owl picture. It's my only wild short-eared owl that isn't being held by a band or picture. These are all captive birds. Boreal owls, I have probably better pictures of boreal owls and great gray owls than any other species. Oh, and some barn owls. They're one that's found in the far north and in the mountains, but also across Europe and Asia. And this one is being harassed by a downy woodpecker at the Saxon bog. This one is being sworn at by a chickadee who knows a surprising number of naughty words. And they're just beautiful little owls. They nest in trees that they like aspen trees that are in their 40s or 50s and starting to get rotten on the inside. This is a whole big area. Why does the owl care? It doesn't know anything about that. But pileated woodpeckers do. Once they get the hole in, they clear out that soft sawdust, spit it out, and make a chamber where they nest to raise baby pileated woodpeckers. And after the baby pileated woodpeckers move out, the boreal owls can move in. And my friend Steve Wilson took these pictures. His technique for finding boreal owl nests was to go out in April at nighttime on still nights and listen for boreal owls to call. When he heard one, he would snowshoe in because you're supposed to snowshoe up here in April. He would find the owl, he would find the aspen tree near the owl that had a cavity in it, and he would tie a rope around it. The next day, he'd go back and climb up the tree and pull out a boreal owl. And then he would leave them alone. But he would still be going out censusing. And the first still night that he didn't hear a boreal owl, he would hike in, reach in to the hole the next day and pull out two boreal owls. The males call to attract a mate, and then they shut up for the season so he could band them both. And then during the summer season, he would be checking on them and their babies. And so a boy and his owl. And Sunday is what some people call Super Bowl Sunday. I prefer to move the B over and call it Superb Owl Sunday. And on Superb Owl Sunday in 2013, during my big year, I went birding with my husband. This is not my husband. This is Jim Lind. He saw us down looking for a boreal owl, and he came down to tell us there was a saw-whet owl just a couple blocks away, and he had never met my husband. So we're standing there chatting, and all of a sudden, Jim and I look up, and he's pointing, and look what's there. So we got pictures of the best boreal owl I have ever seen on Superb Owl Sunday. It was hunting, and we watched it catch a shrew, which looks pretty tragic here. And it ate it, and we watched it do some hunting. I got my most beautiful picture ever of a boreal owl, thanks to looking for it on Superb Owl Sunday. And this boreal owl had chased a flying squirrel into somebody's attic through a vent. And they were hearing all this racket up in the attic. It went up and they chased out the flying squirrel, but the owl was so hungry, it was so starving, it could not fly. And its wings, it just had no muscles to power the wings. So it went down to the Raptor Center. I stayed up all night with it, feeding it first Pedialyte and then Gerber strain chicken, and then brought it to the Raptor Center in the morning. So I look like I've stayed up all night. And I'm with my friend Billy Anderson in this picture. And the night the Chicago Cubs won the World Series, I was so excited I couldn't breathe. And I stayed up watching TV till 1 in the morning. And then I had to take Pip the Wonder Dog outside. We went outside and a boreal owl, not this one, that's my superb owl Sunday one. A boreal owl was calling in my backyard to celebrate the Chicago Cubs win. It was pretty cool. And our tiniest owl, the last one, is the saw-whet owl. They're an American owl that gets down into Central America. They're adorable. I took this picture across the street at my friend's house. Amber called me up and let me know about it. That was, I think, back in November. And now it's getting ready to go hunting because it's late in the afternoon. So it's preening its little feet. And it's the only picture I have of a wild owl showing me the bottom of its foot. So I had to throw it in there. And here, one has caught a mouse, and the way and it probably had already caught a mouse that night, and now it has another mouse, and and it's keeping it warm so it can eat it when it gets a little hungrier later in the morning. Um, that's the mouse's feet sticking out there. And here's one looking at me and preening. And here's that one not sleeping. I took this picture in Two Harbors. Sparky Stensas took a picture of the same owl, which is in one of his the field guides he's published, and you could tell he's taller than me just by the slight difference in our angles looking at the bird because we took our pictures when we were side by side. Here's a baby saw-whet owl that I had for a few days. They have these dark, dark faces with these white feathers here. And boreal owl babies have those same white feathers. And I knew exactly why when I had this owl because when he was too little to eat the mice I had, so I had to actually cut the mice, quarter them, and I would have them in a little container next to the bed at bedtime, and he'd be down below. And when it was time to feed him, I could reach down, and that little those white feathers were like an arrow pointing to where his mouth was in the dark, so I didn't have to turn the light on and wake up my poor husband. But here he is in front of my Dave Barry book collection because owls bring out my sense of humor. And that's all the pictures. And I hope I didn't put you to sleep. Next time, I'm going to be talking about the wild birds I have taken care of and about the things, the insights I made about wild birds from having them in such a different environment than what they were used to. So stay safe and well.